OK, it's a very big year ahead for Newcastle. They hope to get back to Europe. Eddie Howe is hoping for some reinforcements. We're going to speak now to Keith Downey, who was asking him the questions this morning. You can see him there. We've got Keith here as well. But this man was on everybody's lips in terms of asking Eddie Howe questions. Guehi, what did Howe have to say?
Yeah, Hayley, it's a strange one because Eddie Howe doesn't really like answering questions on individual players, especially players who are still with other football clubs. But look, we've been reporting for a couple of weeks now. The Newcastle are trying everything to sign Marc Guehi for what could potentially be a club record fee. Yesterday I said it had a third bid turned down. There's some reports this morning that a fourth offer has gone in from Newcastle, and that would tally with what I was told yesterday, which was that negotiations are still continuing behind the scenes, and the phrase I was told are that Newcastle are trying to find a solution to this. So Crystal Palace digging their heels in, trying to make it difficult for Newcastle, but you would have to say they're getting close. £60 million was turned down. We know Crystal Palace are looking for around 65 million, and this is what Eddie Howe had to say on the topic this morning.
I think everyone's looking for the best players that they can find. I think from our perspective, as you said earlier, we've got a good squad. When everyone's fit, I think we've got a very good squad. So to sign players and make your squad better is difficult, but it's achievable. We can do it. But what you don't want to do is make a signing and then in 3 or 4 months' time go, well, it hasn't really kicked us on anywhere, and you're just adding numbers. That's something we've got to avoid at all costs, in my opinion. So it's the difference makers, the players that can take the team on, is what we're looking for. We have done many times in my time here where, especially early on, where there was very much a Newcastle tax on any deal, where we would rung up, the price would double. So many times we were, no, that's not for us. We're not going to go down that road where we feel we're overpaying for players. I think that's changed slightly because people have seen the dynamic that we're not going to pay silly fees for players. So I think now it's returned more to normality.
Now, as we know, Newcastle were, of course, one of the clubs, Keith, caught up in that flurry of deals at the end of June in order to meet profit and sustainability rules. What did Howe have to say on those deals?
Yeah, I don't think it was a nice time for Eddie Howe or anyone really involved at the football club having to sell two players that they wanted to keep in the shape of Elliot Anderson and Jan Kuba Minte, two players who will both play Premier League football this season with Nottingham Forest and Brighton respectively. But Newcastle needed to raise £60 million to ensure they did not face a points deduction in January, and it was the lesser of two evils. They had to sell a couple of players. He did not want to do that, but what that now means is that they've got the chance to sign players now, which is why they're in talks with Crystal Palace over Marc Guehi. They're into a new accounting period, but despite that, Eddie Howe was keen to stress this morning, despite the fact they're in talks over the £65 million rated Marc Guehi, they still are very close to the wall with regards to PSR, and it's going to be a problem for them moving forward.
Can't swear, can I? June was difficult. June was stressful.
Yeah.
June was very, very different. I've not been in that situation before, where you're in a position where you're looking to potentially make decisions from a financial perspective, but not from a football perspective, and that sort of goes against everything that I'm thinking about is trying to improve the team, but for that moment it was totally different. Once that had gone and we sort of got over the disappointment of losing two really talented young players that we didn't want to lose, you look forward and you look to the future. You have to, and it's all then been about improving our squad. Here we're restricted in our spending because of financial fair play rules, which we have to respect, we have to adhere to. I think the only thing from my perspective, and I've said this before, is I've got no issue dealing and working with the restrictions that we're under, but the expectations then have to be adjusted to the reality of the world we're living in. And I think sometimes there's a misalignment. There's constantly talking about the richest club in the world and we've got all this money, but we're not allowed to spend it. So expectations have to be adjusted, in my opinion.
Right, another big line today. We know a return date, don't we, for Sandro Tonali? How is he looking after, of course, a very long period out?
Yeah, 10 months away for Sandro Tonali, Hayley. I would guess it's been a difficult time for him dealing with all his personal problems and, you know, not being able to kickstart his career at Newcastle United. And for Newcastle, they spent £55 million on the Italian international last summer. They've only seen him a handful of times. And I think what's made it even more frustrating for Eddie Howe, and I suppose his players as well, is that Tonali's been training here at the training ground on a daily basis, and he's been able to see his quality but not been able to use him. But yeah, as you rightly say, confirmation yesterday that Sandro Tonali will be back on August the 28th, so in 2 weeks' time. And he'll be desperate to get back and play and thank the supporters, the Newcastle United supporters, who have been with him every step of the way after being handed that 10-month ban for a gambling issue. This is what Eddie Howe had to say on the imminent return of Sandro Tonali.
He's a very cool customer, Sandro. He's not outwardly emotional necessarily, sort of day to day. You don't sort of see that I'm back, you know, a big grin on his face, but he's very contained emotionally. He's very strong. I think he's handled himself so well during this period. He really has. I mean, when you consider how difficult it's been for him, I'm sure he's had some really hard days. But there's the pressure of the media, there's dealing with everything that's gone with his situation. He's trained really well. He's been a great teammate. I think the players will only speak highly of how he's conducted himself, and they see the true Sandro sort of sometimes more than we do in the dressing room. But I know how focused he is on his return, and I know how excited he is to come back and to show to everyone, to Newcastle, and to thank everyone from Newcastle's perspective, how they've treated him, how they've handled him, especially his relationship with the supporters, which is incredible to see from my perspective. Again, another huge thing for me to say thank you to the Newcastle supporters for how they've looked after him, for how they've dealt with him socially. I think it's been an incredible response, and that will only help him when he returns.
So Sandro Tonali still missing for tomorrow's season opener at home to Southampton. So too are defenders Sven Botman and Jamal Lascelles, and also Callum Wilson, who's a couple of weeks away from a return. So Hayley, still a few injury problems for Eddie Howe, but it certainly looks a lot better than it did last season. And of course they have the England internationals, Kieran Trippier and Anthony Gordon, back and available for selection tomorrow, both having gone all the way to the final of the Euros. So a lot stronger squad for Eddie Howe to pick from tomorrow as they start their season with a home clash against Southampton. And of course they'll be looking to get off to a winning start with what, as you rightly say, will be a big season ahead for them. They are aiming for a place in Europe and potentially even back up to that top four again if they can.